The ordinary course of business covenant that requires the contract seller to carry on its business in the ordinary course between signing and closing. The last 2 years have not been the ordinary course for most businesses.
Joining me today is REIT industry veteran Jim Hanks, partner with Venable. Jim, here at REITwise, you partnered on a panel focused on REIT M&A. What advice do you give REIT boards as they approach a merger?
Well, it depends. It depends in the first instance on whether the client is on the buy side or the sell side. And then it also depends on what the proposed or eventual consideration is, whether it's going to be cash or some form of non-cash consideration like stock or a mixture. So that has to be kept in mind at all times, right down to the final signing. And of course, in that regard, it's important to keep in mind the duties of each director under Maryland law in that regard, which are good faith, reasonable belief of acting in the best interest of the entity, and the care of an ordinarily prudent person in a like position under similar circumstances. So those are going to apply whether we're representing the buyer or the seller. But it's important to keep them in mind. It's also important that they are backed up under Maryland law by a statutory presumption in favor of each director's actions. And that's enormously important and has been applied by the courts many times.
And do macro issues like climate risk or the situation in Ukraine raise concerns for REIT boards with respect to M&A?
Yes. We've seen this over the last couple of years with respect to the pandemic. There's been a lot of litigation that has come out of that. Some of it very interesting litigation involving the material adverse effect clauses of most M&A agreements, and also involving the ordinary course of business covenant that requires the contract seller to carry on its business in the ordinary course between signing and closing. The last 2 years have not been the ordinary course for most businesses. So for a client to say, well, I couldn't operate my business in the ordinary course because if I did, there wouldn't be any business. We'll see whether that turns out to be an effective defense or not.
And lastly, what do you advise REITs that they should do to prepare for an activist investor?
The way we look at it in Maryland is that there are basically two ways to take over a company: a hostile tender offer and a hostile proxy contest. The best defense against a hostile tender offer is a rights plan. If you can't have a rights plan because you're worried about ISS or some other concern, then you may at least want to consider having a rights plan for the shelf, which many companies are doing. As far as a hostile proxy contest is concerned, the best protection there is a classified board. Now, many boards have had to give up classified boards, and they've even had to give up the option of electing into a classified board without shareholder approval, which is permitted under Maryland law. That's a tough situation to be in because a classified board gets you at least an extra year in which you can negotiate with the bidder. But if you've foreclosed a classified board, then I would say advance notice bylaws are very important, and the willingness of the company to engage early on with bidders is also important, whether they're proposing a hostile tender offer or a hostile proxy contest.